So we had started talking about the golden calf, and we got to page, I think about page 498, and it says like this: Moshe Rabbeinu comes down, and on page 500, Moshe Rabbeinu makes one of the famous announcements in Jewish history. On the top of page 500, top line, Vayamod Moshe b'shar ha'machaneh. Moshe stands in the gates of the camp. Vayomer Mila Hashem Elai. Who is devoted to Hashem should come to me. Vayosfu olav kol b'nei Levi. The tribe of Levi came to Moshe Rabbeinu. They did not worship the golden calf. And we'll see later that that's why when the firstborn privileges are taken away, the service privileges are taken away from the firstborns, they're given to the tribe of Levi. Levi is the only tribe that doesn't have anybody who's been involved in this. And then Moshe Rabbeinu says something very interesting. It's a bit subtle, but I want you to look at this and notice this. Vayomer lahem ko amar Hashem, so says Hashem Elokei Yisrael, simu ish charbo ayirecho. Put your swords on your thighs. You know, they used to put what's it called, the sheath or the sheath?
Sheath.
With the F or a TH?
TH.
TH, a sheath.
Yeah.
So what's a sheath? A sheath is like a folder. I think those are two. A sheaf of paper. I think those are two of the words that are very often confused. Put the sheath on your thighs. Ivru v'shuvu b'shar l'shar. Go back and forth from gate to gate. B'machane v'hirgu ishas achi v'ishas reu v'ishas kroa. Kill your brothers, your friends, and your relatives. Now, if nobody from the tribe of Levi worshipped the golden calf, so how could they be killing their relatives? How could their relatives have been involved? They're tribe of Levi.
Yeah, but Aaron.
Yeah, but it says your relatives. How could you have a relative? You're a Levite. Right. So it says like half brothers, that sort of thing. Okay, half brothers and what do you call it? Half brothers or anybody who's not what do you call it? Now, take a look at Rashi on Pasuk Lamed Hey. Rashi says like this. It's in the left column, 4 lines from the bottom. So I'm just jumping ahead for a second. Here it says that Hashem smote the Jewish people. Vayigof Hashem esa'am. So Rashi says, Misa bidei shemayim. They died of natural causes. Those who were guilty died of natural causes. But Moshe Rabbeinu just told the Levites to take swords, didn't he? So there he says, Le'edim below asra. That's where there were witnesses without warning. So there were different levels of death over here. Those who had witnesses that they worshipped, and the witnesses warned them, like every other death in Beis Din. You know, the halacha is very interesting halacha. For capital punishment in Torah, you have to have 2 witnesses that warn a person not to do the avera. Guy picks up a gun, he's about to shoot somebody, sitting in a bar, and somebody said something about his girlfriend. So he gets upset, so he pulls out a gun to shoot the guy. So witnesses have to say to him, if you do this, you will be executed in Beis Din. I think they have to, if I'm not mistaken, they have to specifically say the execution.
So like Miranda rights?
Yeah, you got to read him his rights. I mean, it could be you got to read him his rights, but here it's much more specific. You got to say to him, because that's just anything you say can and will be used against you. Here, it's if you do that, you will be executed in Beis Din by beheading. And then within a couple, he has to acknowledge the warning. He says, well, I don't care. In spite of that, I'm going to do it. And then within a couple of moments, he has to also then commit the crime. They can be by idol worship, adultery, murder, any of the crimes. So that's what's called accepting the warrant, that he was warned properly and halachically. Those who were warned with witnesses properly and halachically by the golden calf, which the Torah doesn't say it happened, but apparently it did. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu assigned 3 different types of execution. So they were executed by the people with the swords. Now, what's interesting here, and this is a little bit subtle, take a look at this pasuk. Now, I want you to go back for a second. Go back to Parshas Vayishlach. This is after the sin. This is after Dinah is violated by Shechem. Remember the story? Dinah goes out and she wanders, and she's violated by Shechem. Take a look at page 184. And so, you remember the story, the 2 sons of Yaakov, Shimon and Levi, go out, and they execute the people of Shechem. Now watch this. On page 184, pasuk 25. So it says like this: Vayhi bayom hashlishi, was on the 3rd day, v'yosem ko'avim, when they were in pain, all the people of Shechem had circumcised themselves. Vayichlu shnei bnei Yaakov, Shimon v'Levi, achei Dina, ish charbo. Each man took his sword. Vayavo alei betach, they came with confidence to the city. Vayargo kol zochar, they killed all males. Do you see a subtle difference between this pasuk and the pasuk that we're dealing with over here? This pasuk is pasuk Chav Hey on page 184, and over here on pasuk Chav Chaf Zayin on page 500. Take a look and tell me if you can see a subtle difference. Very subtle difference. Over here it says, each man take your sword, put it on your put your sword on your thigh, and go back and forth and execute the people who have sinned. Here it says they took their swords, they went to the city, and they killed all the people. They killed all the males. See any subtle difference here? What do you say, Binyamin? Very subtle.
The subtle difference is the way they took their swords.
What's the difference?
The difference is, it says in Vayishlach that Dinah's brothers each took his sword and they came upon the city.
Right. And here?
And here it says, pass back, put his sword on their thighs and pass forward from gate to gate in the camp.
Okay, so where's the difference?
I think it's just in the way that they took their swords. I mean,
What do you say, Mike? Okay, you're right.
Apparently only the males had sinned.
Okay, that's for sure, but that's not to do with the people who did the killing. That's the people who had sinned over there. That's correct. The women didn't sin by the golden calf either, by the way. The women did not sin by the golden calf.
In general.
In general, and at all. The women in general, this is a lesson that we learn, women in general have a greater intuition for what's right and what's wrong. Men get all excited about stuff and decide to go do something, and the women are always like, are you sure? Maybe we should ask a rabbi. No, I'm sure it's okay. The women have kept us out of trouble for years. The women always keep us out of trouble, and especially when men get excited about something. When men are enthusiastic about doing mitzvahs, you got to be careful. That's always a sign of danger. Where's the subtle difference, Isaac?
They take their swords to go into Shechem, but then they put them to their thigh when they go to the brothers.
It doesn't say they put, where? Where does the thigh? Over here, in our passage, right. Moshe Rabbeinu says, put your swords on your thighs. Over there, they go out with the sword up in the air. The sword doesn't say anything about putting a sword there, which is what you were saying, Miriam. They don't have, their sword is out. The sword is drawn. Now, I didn't see the commentary say this, but this is too striking to be a coincidence. You see, you're going out and you are judging laws of capital offense in both cases. You're going out to execute people. So the Torah is teaching you, Moshe says to the Bnei Levi, listen, put your sword on your thigh, because you have to make a decision before you just pull out a sword and go killing people. You're talking about lives over here, and it could be they're not liable for execution of capital offense. It could be they got to die by the plague. It could be they're innocent. The Torah is teaching you, when you have to make decisions like this, keep your sword on your thigh. What was the flaw of Shimon and Levi running through in the entire story? They didn't consult with Yaakov. They seem to have made a decision. They're out there with the sword ready to kill. They took it upon themselves. That's already the Torah. That's not how we work. It's not how we work. Do you know that there's a statement the Gemara says, a judge in Beis Din, you're going to love this. Again, your first name is? Scott. You're going to love this. A judge in Beis Din has to be very, very, on the one hand, you have to be decisive. On the other hand, you have to be cautious. The Gemara says a judge in Beis Din should see himself as if there is a sharp sword perched between his legs. Think about that, Isaac. Think about it. He should think it.
Which way?
What's that? It's a sharp sword between his legs. Right? I don't care which way. I don't care. The very thought.
He's executing others.
Yeah. No. The Gemara is using it in the context of being cautious. What do you think the Gemara is telling you? I think it's pretty clear. Remember, the Gemara, whenever the Gemara uses any sort of analogy, the Gemara is trying to communicate a point. And I think over here, the Gemara is clearly saying, when you're a judge, if a person had a sharp sword perched between their legs, how would you move? Very, very cautiously, right? That's what a judge has to be. On the other hand, you have to be decisive. They're not a contradiction between the two. I once quit. I was on the shul committee. And I had been there. I'd been on the committee for a few weeks. And eventually I quit because one of the guys, there's no right or wrong over here. I think it has to do with an approach to life. But one of the guys on the committee, everything had to be thought about again. If we needed a new door for the shul, do we really need the new door? Where can we get the cheapest price? And nothing gets done that way. So there are different approaches to life. My approach to life is that it's not a question of can we afford it. First question is, do we need it? Do we need it? I don't care if it's free. If I don't need it, and I don't want it. If somebody said to me, Rabbi, why don't you have a cell phone? Orange has a special now, they have reduced rates. Baruch Hashem, I could afford a cell phone. I don't want a cell phone. So if somebody gave me a cell phone for free, I also wouldn't take it. If somebody gave me a television for free, I wouldn't take it. If somebody gave me a Mercedes for free, then we'll talk, right? But a cell phone, I don't want a cell phone, and I don't want a television. Now, if our washing machine breaks, now what's going to happen? To think about it, it's not going to change. It's not going to come to life suddenly in the next 2 weeks. You need a new washing machine. I tell my wife, make 2 calls. Find out what the price range is. That means all the other companies are within the same range. Get a good machine that isn't going to break. Get a German brand, because for sure it's not going to break. And invite them, let's go. Thinking about it is going to help you. So I couldn't stay on the committee because I could not take that we got to get something done after the door. Then we got to work on the shul bathroom, and we got to work on seating and everything. I haven't got time to spend 2 weeks on it, and I quit because I just can't live like that. Other people do, and I'm not. And again, I say there is not necessarily a right or wrong over here. It's almost like the question of, do you let a baby cry in the crib or do you pick the baby up? You let the baby cry is one of the great parenting questions of all time. And there isn't necessarily a proper answer. Some people say, no, the baby's got to be trained. Other people feel, no, the baby cries, you pick him up. Why should you let a baby cry? It's an ongoing debate for hundreds of years. Okay. So here, Moshe Rabbeinu is saying, listen, a judge, you got to be decisive. You got to make a decision. On the other hand, don't be hasty. It's a very, very delicate balance. In Beis Din, they had to come up with a decision within 2 days. A court case lasted a maximum of 2 days. Under rare circumstances, they could go third day. But even life, listen, we got the facts, we've got the evidence. Make a decision. Let's go on. And therefore, there was no backlog that you never had. What's it called in the Western legal court systems? What's it called? Death row and a backlog of cases that are waiting for 6 months. Never didn't work there. Let's go, weiter. So the question people always ask is,
There was no appeals service back then?
no appeals. There's no appeals court in halacha. There's no appeals court in halacha. The only thing that could happen is a Beis Din itself could turn around and say, hey, we made a blatant mistake. There are 2 types of mistakes. Those are good questions. There are 2 types of mistake. There's one mistake in judgment, where we understand it a certain way and you understand it a different way. There's another mistake which is called an objective mistake, where we simply overlooked a written a halacha or a pasuk that's written, and there's an entire masechta of Shas, an entire masechta called Horius, for what Beis Din does when they've made a mistake. They have to bring a korban and so on and so forth. But in general, there's no court of appeals. And one of the big scandals in Israel was years ago. Very, very interesting case that rocked the Torah community. There were a brother and a sister named Langer. Now, these Langer brother and sister, they were born, a woman had been married to a convert, a Jewish woman married to a convert. They got divorced without a get. They had a civil divorce, and she remarried another man named Langer. And they had 2 children, a son and a daughter. When these 2 children got to the age where they both wanted to get married, so in Israel, the rule is it has to go through the chief rabbinate. The chief rabbinate checked the records, and according to the records, this was a woman who married a second man without getting a get from the first one, which means these children are mamzerim. So they had a court. They went to a Beis Din, among who Rabbi Yashiv was on the Beis Din. He was with the rabbinate at the time. And the Beis Din ruled that they are mamzerim based on, a lot of it hinged, I'll tell you what the case hinged on, was whether or not this convert who she had married originally, was it a good conversion or not? Because if it wasn't a good conversion, then he's a goy, which means that no get is necessary, she's just living with him in sin. But if he was Jewish, then they have to have a get, and otherwise she marries a second man. So that's what it hinged on. The Beis Din investigated, they spoke to, they cross-examined him. There was a whole, one of the questions I remember what was humorous, they had him, and in the questioning, they were asking him basic Jewish questions. They said, how many times does a Jew daven each day? And he said, twice. So they said, why twice? He said, well, there's Shacharis and there's Mincha Ma'ariv. Because in America they have the Mincha Ma'ariv minyan. They said Shacharis and Mincha Ma'ariv. So they paskin that he's Jewish. They paskin in the Beis Din rule that they're mamzerim. There was a man in Israel, I don't want to mention his name, who wanted to become the chief rabbi, and had worked out a deal with the politicians. For some reason, it was in their interest that they should not be mamzerim. He went, assembled a separate Beis Din, and overturned the ruling of the first Beis Din, which doesn't exist in halacha, number one. Number two, he wouldn't reveal who the other judges were with him on his Beis Din. And he overturned the ruling. He was motivated politically. So what happened was, almost every rabbi at the time that you've ever heard of, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, the Stipler, Rav Shach, every rabbi in the books came out with a letter castigating this man, saying that he is no longer authorized to paskin, his rulings are not rulings, and so on and so forth. The Beis Din then, out of the ordinary, the original Beis Din, because of the circumstances, did reassemble, examined the case again, and again they determined that they're mamzerim, and he ruled that they're not, which has no validity, and they went out and got married. Each one married their partner, whoever was that they married. That rocked the Jewish world. So there is no court of appeals. There's no court of appeals in Torah. Now, the real question is, yeah, but if they decide things within a day or two, can't they make mistakes? Maybe they'll make mistakes. That's a valid question. And the answer is, number one, the people who were deciding these things are absolutely the top Talmidei Chachamim and scholars, number one. Number two, yes, they could make a mistake. But then, like everything else in society, we always have to look at, since there is no one perfect method, which is, in the overall picture, better for the society or worse for the society? Is it better for a society to have things decided and move on to the next case? And there will be a possibility of mistakes, unlikely, but it's possible. Or to have a system where, because it's taking so long, so then the justice isn't done either, because people are waiting for years and years and years for their case to come to court. You understand? So the Torah says the former is better than the latter. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, that was one of the arguments of the Chinese against the Americans. The Americans were always accusing the Chinese, because of communism, of violating civil rights. The response of the Chinese to Americans was, listen, you claim we're violating civil rights, but you're such liberals, you can't walk an American city, the streets of an American city, without fear for your life, because you have so much crime there, because of your liberal laws and lack of punishment. That was their argument. I don't say they're right or wrong. I just say their counter argument was, well, you're criticizing our system, but look at your society. You can't walk downtown in any major American city for fear of your life. That was their counter argument. So no system is perfect. No system is perfect. We recognize that. And the mistake is, if there's one thing that we are fully cognizant of our fallibilities as Torah Jews. The Torah that was given to frum Jews, the Jews at Sinai were frum. The Torah says, don't murder. Who are you talking to? Who are you talking to? You're talking to me. Don't commit bestiality. Who are you talking to? You're talking to every single person in Bnei Brak. Which means that it's not likely, but we're capable of anything. And we recognize we're capable of it. And it happens. It happens, okay. Much lower percentages, much lower numbers, but we're human beings. That's why Torah wasn't given to angels. Torah was given to human beings. So here is the first lesson is, you got a job to do. Keep your sword. Don't keep the gun in the holster. Don't parade around with your gun out. This isn't what do you call it, Missouri, where the cops walk around with a gun. And keep your gun in your holster, okay? That's this a classic example. What's it called in New York? The stop and frisk, right? That's a classic example. Are you concerned about the stop and frisk? Generally, they're stopping and frisking people who need to be frisked. Right? So, but you're picking on a certain ethnic group. Yeah, and what about the other people? So if you don't do the stop and frisk, then the streets become more dangerous for people. You understand? You got to draw a bail. Which is the worst? Okay, I don't know that there's an objective answer necessarily. I only know that when I was walking in New York, when I was recently in New York, and they have this thing, what they call the knockout. They call it a knockout game. Have you heard about this knockout game? Well, what was happening was that black teenagers, young teenagers, if you just stop on the street. They see a frum guy, and all of a sudden they unleash a punch, and they were hurting people. It was called the knockout game, and the New York police are trying. They just walk as you're walking past, the guy just hauls off and punches them. It's usually little kids, not little, but they teenagers, 14, 15 years old, and all of a sudden you see a little old Jewish man, and boom, or an old Jewish woman, and boom. Now when I was walking on the streets of last time I was in Flatbush, every time I saw a black kid coming towards me, I wasn't scared. But as I saw him, I just got into more of just a kind of an awareness position that I could at least go like this if I see a punch coming. I can't, I don't know martial arts. Just to be aware, not to be walking around like this, all of a sudden catch them on the jaw. Because so what's better, what's worse? It's a very difficult thing to say. It's a very difficult thing to say. There are arguments for and against, statistics about where they have capital punishment. I mean, what do you call it? Where's that place called? Is it Thailand? Where the kid got caned? Remember Malaysia. Where was it? Singapore, where the kid got Singapore. The kid, remember a few years back, there was a kid who was caught spray painting or something. Yeah. They were going to hit him with six canes with a bamboo cane on the backside, which apparently hurts like heck.
Yeah.
And there was an international outcry, and they reduced it to 4. Right, and then he got 4, and he said, you know, I've taken Singapore off my must-visit list, you know. And then the kid went, you know, now in Singapore, so say, well, that's a little harsher spray painting, yeah, but nobody in Singapore spray paints. Nobody in Singapore, I think they don't chew gum. They don't. Singapore, they don't chew gum. They don't say. So you argue, yeah, but it's a little harsh. On the other hand, the place works and it's clean. You know. So it's always a very very tricky. I don't know that there's an objective answer. It just there's always an argument in both directions, which is.
In Singapore, if you get caught smuggling in drugs, they kill you on the spot.
Well, they don't kill you on the spot. They don't kill you on the spot, but there are Thailand also. There are 2 Australians right now. 2 Australians right now who were 10 years in prison for smuggling drugs, and and now they've sentenced them to death. And the Australian government and the Thailand government are going at it trying to get these guys off because they don't want it. Okay, you know. So you argue, you know, what works back and forth. What works? So again, it's very hard to say. You know what the English used to do to Arab terrorists? What the English did to the Arab, the English who are always telling us that we're violating human rights. You know what the English used to do? When they would catch a terrorist, after they executed them, they would then bury them in a pigskin. Because the Mohammedans believe that if you're buried in a pigskin, you do not go to the world of truth with the 70 maidens. So that would discourage them from realizing that you're not going to the world of truth. Would discourage them. And, you know, is that right? But you're violating his rights. Yeah, but he's violating other people. You know, it's an argument back and forth. That's the argument. So over here, the Torah tells you when it comes to human life, you know, just keep your sword on your sheath. You know, you need it; it'll be there, right? I mean, in Chicago also, every once in a while there was a policeman who his gun accidentally went off. You know, it's usually, I remember this because in Chicago, the police was chasing a black kid and he tripped and his gun accidentally went off and somehow from 50 yards away hit him right between the eyes, which is interesting considering the kid is running in the other direction, you know. So we'll never know now, will we? You know, we don't know. I met a guy who was a narc in New York. He was a police, he worked in Bedford-Stuyvesant. He was a narc for 22 years. So he was described, tough as nails. He was describing some of his activities. I said, Ed, you know, I mean, what happened, you know, when you were doing this, what happened if there were witnesses? So he looks at me, starts chuckling, because there were no witnesses. you know, they took care of it. They had it all worked out, you know. So you wonder, is it better? It's worse? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. But here, certainly in Torah law, you're going to do it. Now, if somebody is gotten off the hook, just realize if they get somebody off the hook on a technicality, what you mentioned, the Miranda... What was it? He killed somebody and they didn't read him his rights? Yeah. That was, and they knew he killed somebody, right? So in Torah, you would never let a guy like that go free. In other words, if the Beis Din knows somebody killed somebody, but they got off on a technicality, but you know that he's committed especially crime of violence, So he's taken out of the circulation. They're not allowed to actively execute him, but they put him in prison until he dies. They put him in prison. We know you're a murderer. We know you're a murderer. We can't have murderers running in the streets. The Gemara mentions a very extreme case. You're not going to believe this. The Gemara mentions a very extreme case of a man went around hitting people. Now, he was warned not to, and he was able to pay the fine. There's a fine when you hit somebody. If you damage them, you have to pay a fine. He was wealthy enough to be able to pay the fine. So he went around hitting people. And they said, don't hit people. They warned him. I think they warned him twice, 3 times. And eventually they removed his hand. They removed his hand because the guy was not cooperating. You know, the guy said, listen, I can afford it. Well, we can't have a society where people walk around slugging people. And so in a very extreme case, there's another case the Gemara says a woman was peddling her wares. And they warned her not to, and she wouldn't stop, so they would not desist, so they removed her nose, which makes one far less attractive. And that was what they did in order to get her to stop peddling her wares. That was so again. They didn't walk around with knives chopping people's heads off, but they're warning a person. We are responsible to allow people to walk the streets. You're not letting people walk the streets. We've warned you. Now, how many times are we going to warn you? We've warned you. We warned you. They probably warned him that they're going to remove his hand, and eventually they said, "Okay, for under the circumstances, we have no choice." And the Beis Din removed his hand.
To your original example of the guy shooting a person, but the 2 witnesses or whatever didn't say, if you shoot that person, you're going to get executed. If the person shoots the person, and everyone knows, okay, he shot and killed that other person, but he didn't get the warnings. how would the court be able to handle that?
That's exactly the case. The witnesses say, we saw him shoot somebody. Okay, was there a warning? No, there was no warning. Okay, everybody knows you're not supposed to murder. So they would arrest the guy and they put him in jail. They actually put him in jail and he stays there. Any crime of violence, any crime of violence, he's removed from circulation. Torah people think, well, he got off on a technicality, so he got murderers running the streets. They weren't foolish. They ran a very good society. So first of all, murder was not that prevalent among Jews anyway. But even when it was, if we knew that a guy committed a crime of violence, he's got to be taken out of commission. We can't have him. It's not fair. It's not fair to me. Why do I have to suffer because this guy got off on a technicality? What would happen? Mandela killed somebody. How did they know he killed? They knew they had witnesses or something. And then they didn't read him his rights.
Who?
Mandela, not Mandela. What's his name? Not Mandela. Who was it? Who was the guy? Miranda Mandela.
Nelson Mandela, I don't think he killed
Miranda
any
did.
political prisoners.
Oh yeah, didn't kill anybody. He was a terrorist, a political prisoner.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, he
His
led the.
life was worse, but he did do something.
Yeah, he did a lot of things. He was but he was a freedom fighter. That's the difference between a terrorist. He was a freedom fighter. In any event, let's go on. Okay, so take a look at pasuk Lamed Daled. Take a look at pasuk Lamed Daled. A little bit frightening, but at least it puts things into proper perspective. Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu like this. It's page 500, 5 lines from the bottom. Listen, my friend and I were once driving in Chicago. We were in Grant Park. We'd come out of Second City. Second City, you know, do they still have Second City? Jim Belushi was actually, John was a big star at the time. Jim Belushi was performing at Second City. So I think Jim became a big star afterwards, right? So at the time he was just in Second City. So we come out, we get into our car, we're driving in Grant Park. We're in the parking lot over there. So my friend's driving, and all of a sudden we hear a cop car from behind us, says, pull over. We hear the megaphone, pull over. My friend pulls over, so the cop pulls up behind and says, what are you doing? Keep going. My friend looks at me and he starts driving and says, hey, I said pull over. So he pulls over, then again the megaphone. What are you doing? I said keep driving. Right? So he looks at me and says, I'm not moving. We both put our hands on the dashboards. You know, Chicago guy, I don't know what the guy's on, and I don't know what he's up to. We put our hands on, we're 19, we put our hands on the dashboards. Guy comes over, and I think they were both either a little either having fun or a little tipsy. We were, you know, so they're the ones with the guns, not us. You know, and so he gave my friend a ticket. You know, he walks around the car, I gave him a ticket for having a crack on the front of his windshield, which is pretty good vision for at night, for being behind us and being able to see from the back of the car that he's got a crack on the front of the windshield. We were terrified. We're sitting there with our hands on the windshield. We're not moving. We're just waiting. We're not going to move till these guys come over. Because they could just say we're trying to escape. Who knows what they're going to say? I remember my parents, when I came home, my parents were so upset. They were just petrified. Because there were incidents like that in Chicago. It wasn't like it never happened. So listen, you know, what's the power corrupt? How does it go? If power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So no, they're not all perfect, you know, but it's better. You still need cops. Okay, take a look at pasuk Lamed Daled. It's 5 lines from the bottom of the page. So it says like this. Guide the people to the place where I have spoken to you. My angel will go before you. My messenger will go before you. Uviyom pakdi upakadati aleim chatosam. How did the article translate pakdi? On the day that I make my account. Okay, that's not a bad I would have translated on the day that I take retribution. But pakad really comes from the Hebrew word to count. And in this context, when I take them to accountability for this Aveira. Now, what Rashi says over here is like this. You see, you got a sin over here where God's first reaction is, he says to Moshe Rabbeinu, I'm going to destroy the Jewish people. First reaction, I'm going to destroy Jewish people. Moshe Rabbeinu says, and God says to Moshe Rabbeinu, if you don't stop me, I'm going to destroy the Jewish people. So Moshe understands that's an invitation to daven for the Jewish people. So Moshe Rabbeinu davens for the Jews. He says, please Hashem, bear their iniquity, don't destroy the Jewish people. That's how bad the Aveira is. So God, you know what it's comparable to? Just to put it, what the Medrash compares it to. A man is getting married. At the chuppah, his wife commits adultery. It's pretty indiscreet. It's pretty crude, right? God and the Jewish people are metaphorically compared to the husband and the wife. And so if the wife takes another God, that's like taking another husband. And it's right at the point where the Torah is being given, right at the chuppah. I mean, that the chuppah, the luchos and the chuppah is the marriage union between God and the Jewish people. You know, that's pretty crude. And therefore you destroy, and what would a husband do? Well, imagine in Saudi Arabia if that happened, right? What would a husband do? So God says, you know, you deserve to be wiped out. I'm not going to wipe you out. But on the day that I take accountability, I will take them to account for their sin. So Rashi points out over here that the sin was so great that all through Jewish history, we're going to be paying for this sin. Which means anytime if there was a Holocaust, part of that is because of the sin of golden calf. If there was the Khmelnytsky massacres, part of that is because of the sin of the golden calf. If you stubbed your toe 3 days ago, part of that was the sin of the golden calf. If your mother-in-law comes for an extended visit, let's just say, welcome, golden calf. You understand? Every form of suffering has an iota, but that gives you an idea of how vast the Avera was. So somebody asked me a good question. He says, why should I suffer because of the sin of the golden calf? Why should I suffer? Why should I stub my toe because what's that?
Because you were there.
Okay, that's certainly my neshama was there. Okay, my neshama was there. But my neshama, I'm not accountable for my neshama. I'm accountable for what I do physically. The answer is because the alternative would be that I wouldn't be here right now. They would have been destroyed. The Jewish people would have been totally wiped out. So now we're paying the price. If I give you a choice, what's your choice? Would you rather stub your toe or not be here? Right? Well, I take the latter. Okay, yeah. Okay, that. Every iota of suffering that the Jewish people go through, that's the Avera. That's due to the Avera of the golden calf.
What did the drinking of the calf a few
Good.
paragraphs earlier have to do with all this? Like, did people who get
The drinking of the water where they mix it. Good, excellent question. So the answer to that is that was the third form of death. Some people died by the sword, some people died by the plague, and if there was no witnesses at all, they were checked with the water. Does that sound like anything that you're familiar with in Torah? A sota, a woman who has strayed, the husband accuses his wife of being unfaithful. Now, we're talking about a very specific circumstances. We're talking about a man says to his wife, do not isolate yourself. Do not be alone with so-and-so. Husband doesn't like, the guy came to the house as a guest on Shabbos, and the guy was very enchanting, and he noticed that his wife was spending a little too much time giggling at his jokes, and then the guy came 2 weeks later, and the wife was chit-chatting with him, and then 3 weeks later, the husband went up to sleep early, and the wife was again sitting up with him late, and the husband don't like the way this is moving. And then one day he says, I don't want you to isolate yourself with Plony. And then one day she's alone behind a closed door with him. What are people doing behind a closed door? At that point, he takes her to the Beis Hamikdash. They erase God's name write God's name on a parchment and arrange it in the water. She drinks the water. If she's guilty, she dies. She doesn't explode, by the way. That's a myth. She does not explode. That, contrary to popular belief, it's not an after-dinner mint. She doesn't explode. She dies of a stomach ailment. She doesn't explode. It's not like they what do you call it? She doesn't explode, but she dies. If she's innocent, so then the Gemara says that if she didn't have children, she'll have children. If she had difficult births, she'll have easier birth, and so on and so forth. But you see, it fits the story perfectly over here. Because this is the wife who's suspected of being unfaithful. The Jewish people collectively are the wife that's suspected of being unfaithful. So the proper punishment is, okay, now drink the water. So Moshe Rabbeinu takes the golden calf, dissolves it into the water, now drink. Don't they have, what's that there's an alcoholic drink that has little pieces of gold in it?
Goldschlager.
Goldschlager, yeah. So the Jews have the original, of course the Jews started it. The Jews have some Goldschlager over here, right? But this is a Goldschlager that you either end up gold or you end up Schlager. Because they, what do you call it? They put it, you drink some Goldschlager. And if you're guilty, there were no witnesses, there's no warning. So we have 3 degrees of death. There's witnesses and warning is capital punishment. There's witnesses but no warning. Then it's the plague. And there's no witnesses and no warning. But you were already forewarned because you knew that you're not supposed to worship other gods. So then they drank the water, and if they died like a sota died.
What if somebody had a case where they were supposed to drink the water, but they knew no matter what, okay, this is the end, and they said, can I have a method of death that is...
I don't think that the Gemara says that a woman has a choice where they take a woman to give her the water. The Gemara says openly that up until God's name is erased, she could confess, and she's off the hook. They have to get divorced, and she has sinned, but at least she confessed her sin. She confessed her sin. We're not going to erase God's name.
Isn't her sin adultery? And that's
It is, but there were no witnesses. There are no witnesses.
So they won't even imprison her.
They won't imprison her because it's not a crime of violence. It's not a crime of violence. She's not a danger. She's not a menace to society. So she's a flagrant sinner. No, believe if she does become a menace to society, remember there's nose removal lurking. So if she is a menace to society, so they do take methods with her. A person who sins has had warning even on smaller sins. They'll imprison him if he just flagrantly is disregarding the Torah. In this case, she's not a violent threat.
Right.
She has to get divorced, but we don't want to erase God's name for no reason. That she could do up until the point the name has been erased. Once the name has been erased and she says, no, I don't want to drink the water, then the Gemara says she's forced to drink the water.
What does that mean, God's name erased? Like, how does this actually...
They write God's name on a parchment. The God's name, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, they write it on a parchment. They drop it in the water and it dissolves in the water. And then she drinks the water.
Doesn't whether she die or not depend on what they wrote?
No, it depends on whether or not she's guilty. They write God's name. Drop it in the water, she drinks
Right,
the
but
water.
they write it in arsenic paint.
Yeah, but they didn't. They didn't. They just wrote it. No, they just wrote it. They didn't use arsenic. They used ink. They didn't write. It says the Gemara talks about what type of ink they have to use. They didn't.
Is
The
the
go.
ink, is it...
What's it called? Like
safe
children's
to
toys.
consume? Yeah, exactly.
Children's toys. What's it called?
Non-toxic.
Non-toxic. Yeah, it's non-toxic ink. It's made out of natural stuff.
Right.
It's not the ink. It's not the ink.
Because then
Yeah, no.
setting up the-
No.
Guilty,
No,
everybody.
these weren't Salem witch trials where you dunked her for 20 minutes. I guess she must have been a witch. She died. It wasn't Salem witch trial. All right, we'll continue tomorrow, Mr. Shem.